Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear student teachers, Assalamu alaikum. I am Rashid Salim with lecture number 32 of Functional English 1. First of all, you deserve congratulations because you have successfully completed the video lectures. Today is the last lecture of Functional English 1 and you deserve congratulations. बल्कि मैं इसे ये कहता हूँ कि आज आपने अपनी 32वीं मुकम्मल कर ली है. So please show your 32वीं. Like lecture number 31, we are going to revise the course contents in lecture number 32. So lecture number 32 is end of course revision part 2. The objectives of lecture number 32 are that you will recall the course contents of lecture 16 onwards, that is from lecture 16 to lecture 30. And while doing so, you will revisit and you will practice the key skills once again, and you will also recall major structures and vocabulary items that you have been learning throughout this course. So this is really crucial because it will jog your memory, it will provide you yet another chance to practice some of the key structures, and definitely it will also help you prepare for the final exam. Okay, we begin with the revision of lecture number 16. And if you can recall, lecture number 16 was about planning ahead. And planning ahead actually included talking about future. And we learned that we can talk about future by using various structures. Normally we assume that we should use future simple in order to talk about future. But for different kinds of functions in future, we use various different structures. Sometimes we use future simple tense. Sometimes we use the structure be going to. Sometimes we use present simple for future, and sometimes we use present continuous for future. And I think now you can recall that for different kinds of functions we use a different kind of structure. We don't use these structures randomly. Instead, for a particular kind of function, we have a particular kind of structure. So what I want you to do is to match the functions with their appropriate structures. So look at these functions first. If you have to make a sudden decision about future, you are not talking about planned future. Instead, you have suddenly made up your mind to do something. How would you express it in English? Which structure would you use for it? Similarly, if you are talking about planned future, if it is already planned or if it is your intention, your target, your goal, your intention, then which structure would you use? And if it is already an arrangement and it is known to few people already, for example, you have arranged a meeting and 3 or 4 people are already aware of this arrangement. What about the fixed schedule? If you talk about an event which is given in a timetable or in an academic calendar, so it is already fixed, and it usually it is regular in its happening. So think of these functions and try to find out the best structure that can express these functions. So how are you going to match these functions? Okay, here are the answers. For a sudden decision, you will use future simple tense. For example, if right now suddenly there is a doorbell, the doorbell rings, and I decide to open the door, I would say, I'll open it. Or if the phone bell rings, I can say, I'll get it. So if you are making any sudden decision, it was not pre-planned, then you will use future simple tense. Whereas for planned future, or sometimes for intentions, you will say be going to. For example, if you have already planned, you can say that I am going to, during my scholarship exam or during my scholarship tour, I am going to stay in a hostel. This is already planned. I am going to stay in the hostel. Whereas your intention can be something that you want to do in future. For example, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a dental surgeon. I'm going to visit France. So these can express your intentions. So be going to is used for planned future and for intention. So make sure that if you make a certain decision, don't use be going to, use future simple. Whereas for planned future and for intentions, you can use be going to. Okay, known arrangement. If an event has already been arranged and 2 or 3 people are already aware of this arrangement, you can use present continuous tense for that. So you can say, the Prime Minister is visiting Manila next year. Okay, it is already arranged, and some people already know about it. There is a slight difference between planned future and known arrangement. Known arrangement is also planned future, but this one is the assumption is that few people are already aware of this arrangement, whereas maybe so far only you know about planned future, no one else knows about your planning yet. So make sure that there is a difference. And if this difference is not clear, you can use any of these. You can either use present continuous tense or you can use be going to. It won't matter. What about fixed schedule? Fixed schedule is usually given in timetables, in calendars. So in calendar there is an entry for a fixed event, or like you have the timetable for the classes, the periods that you take. For that you can use present simple tense. For example, you can say on Mondays students have their practical, or you can say on Tuesdays Mr. Smith gives his presentation. By fixed schedule we mean that this is something which is probably a regular phenomenon, something that happens again and again. As we use present simple tense for routines, similarly we can use present simple tense for future routines as well. So these are the 4 structures that we can use for these different kinds of functions. Make sure that you get them right. Okay, let's move on to lecture number 17. And lecture number 17 was about asking and responding to questions. And as teachers, it is really very important asking questions, grammatically correct questions, and also answering the questions. In fact, most of our instructional time is passed in asking and answering questions. So my first question about lecture number 17 is, can you recall the 4 question types that you have studied? Okay. All right, think of these 4. Here is the answer. You have yes/no questions, you have WH questions, you have tag questions, and you have embedded questions. Yes/no questions are those questions that require an answer in either yes or no. And these questions usually start with a helping verb. For example, you say, does Ali live in Islamabad? Do you play football? Did he come late yesterday? Will you go to Karachi tomorrow? Can you drive a car? Should we wear uniform? So all these questions can be answered either by yes or by no. Therefore, these questions are called yes-no questions. Whereas WH questions are those questions that cannot be answered with yes-no, and usually they start with WH, like what, when, where, why, and some of the question words may not actually start with WH, but they are considered like WH question words, like how. So if your question starts with how, please consider it as a WH question, although apparently it's not a WH question, but it counts as one. Tag questions. Tag questions are usually appended to the at the end of a statement. For example, I say, you are Ali, aren't you? You came late, didn't you? So you came late is the statement, and didn't you is the tag which is appended to it. And usually this kind of question is asked for confirmation. It has various different functions. Whereas the last one, embedded questions, are those questions that are asked indirectly. For example, do you know where Ali lives? So do you know is the direct question, and where Ali lives is the embedded question or the indirect question. Or I wonder where Ali lives. So where Ali lives is an indirect question or an embedded question. So these are the four kind of questions that you have studied. Let's move on. What's the difference between a positive and a negative yes-no question? You know that yes-no questions can further be divided into two kinds. A positive yes-no question and a negative yes-no question. So now I'm going to ask you, what's the difference between a positive and a negative yes-no question? What's your answer? Yes, you are close. A positive yes-no question does not have any assumption, underlying assumption. So when you say, do you know Ali? You are simply asking information. You don't have any underlying assumption. Whereas for negative yes-no question, you have some underlying assumption. It is not merely asking information. There is some underlying assumption, or you expect something. For example, if you say, don't you know Ali? The underlying assumption is, or you expect that that I know Ali. Didn't you come late? Means that you simply want to confirm, and you expect that I came late, right? So that's the difference between positive and a negative yes-no question. All right, now my final question about lecture number 17 is, which question word would you use for seeking the following information? Okay, so let's look at each of these and find out the most appropriate question word. So if you want to seek information about distance, well, one way could be, what's the distance? But I think this is really very formal, and this is not really very natural way of asking it. Instead, you can use a question word, how far? How far is Karachi from here? So instead of asking, what's the distance of Karachi from here? It looks very unnatural. You should ask, how far is Karachi from here? How far is the National Bank from here? For price, we use the question word that we use is how much. So we say, how much does it cost? How much does this pen cost? How much does this book cost? Or sometimes you can simply say, how much is it? All right, when you are inquiring about the frequency of an action, how frequently something is done, you can use the question word, how often. For example, how often do you visit your parents? How often do you phone call your kids? How often do you pray? How often do you brush your teeth in a day? Okay, for asking about choice or an option, you have the question word which. And usually you add a noun after which. So you say, which color is your favorite? Which animal is the fastest? Okay, so if you have to choose between various animals, between various books, between various things, you can use which. If you are asking about a person, especially what something belongs to, or who something belongs to. So if you want to know who is the owner of this pen, how would you ask it in English? Yes, the question word is whose. Whose pen is it? Whose pen is it? So you want to know the person who owns this pen. Okay, great. Now we move on to lecture number 18. And lecture number 18 was really interesting. It was about reading riddles and jokes. And if you can recall, in this lecture we also met one of the characters called Funny. All right. Well, basically this lecture was about enjoying riddles and jokes. So there are not many questions, but I can ask you, what is a pun? And can you recall any riddle with a pun? What is a pun? That's right. A pun is when a word has more than one meanings, and both meanings are valid in the given context. I repeat, when a word has more than one meanings and all meanings or both meanings are valid in the given context, we say we are using a technique which is called a pun. A pun is basically a device in order to create humor or in order to create literary effect. Now, can you recall any riddle with a pun? Here are two. What has a head and a tail but no body? Can you answer? That's right, it is a coin. Now, a coin has a head and it has a tail. It has two sides. One of the sides is called a head, another is called tail. So when you toss a coin, you usually say head or tail. Okay. Now you know the word head and tail, it has been used in two of its meanings. One meaning of head is a part of a body. Similarly, tail is part of a body. And therefore we have the word body here. But when we talk about coins, we are not talking about the parts of the body of an animal. Instead, we are talking about the two sides of a coin. So head and tail, these are two examples of pun. And here they create humor and they also they are funny. What has ears but can't hear? The right answer is corn. C-O-R-N, corn. Well, corn has ears. The ears of a corn are different from ears of a human being. But here the word ears has been used in such a way that both meaning are valid. So this is another example of pun. All right, now one more question about lecture number 18. Can you tell a joke in English? Yeah, think of some. All right, I'm going to quickly tell you a joke in English. Once there were 4 engineers traveling in a car. These engineers were, one of them was electrical engineer, another was mechanical engineer, the third one was chemical engineer, and the fourth one was a software engineer. The car broke down on the way, and the electrical engineer said that there is something wrong with the wiring, so let me check it. He went out of the car, he opened the bonnet, and he tried his best, but the car didn't start. The chemical engineer said, oh, there's something wrong, probably there's something wrong with the petrol, with the fuel. So he also tried his best, but his strategy didn't work either. Then the mechanical engineer said, oh, there is something wrong with the clutch. And he also tried his best, but it didn't work. Finally, the software engineer, he said, okay, if you couldn't solve, let me solve the problem. So he asked everyone, including the driver, to get into the car. And then he said, shut down all the windows. Now restart the car. Did it work? Okay, I hope it makes you laugh. If it doesn't, then probably you haven't got the point. And I'm not going to explain a joke because it will mar all the humor. Okay, let's move on to lecture number 19. Lecture number 19 is about describing people. And you know, we can describe people by looking at their face, the shape of their face, the color of their skin. We can describe their hair, we can describe their eyes, lips, and also the kind of things that they are wearing. And we can also use comparative forms of degrees. Okay, now can you describe the people in the following picture? Look at the picture and try to describe them. So there are 4 people in this picture. We have a lady here. She has got an oval face and she has got fair complexion. She has got big broad lips, and she has got blonde hair, shoulder length, blonde hair, straight hair, and she is wearing a coat and a shirt. She is also wearing a necklace. All right, here we have a gentleman who has got graying hair, and he parts his hair somewhere in the middle. He has got thin lips, he has got almost round face, and he has got double chin, I think. He is probably the tallest of all these people, or maybe he is the tallest, I'm not really sure. And this gentleman is wearing a necktie and a suit. The lady here, she has got short afro hair, and she has got dark complexion, and she is wearing a shirt. Whereas the gentleman here, he has got broad forehead, he has got short hair, short black wavy hair probably. No, this gentleman has got wavy, this one just got short hair, and all of them are smiling. You can also try to guess their personalities by looking at their physical features, but there is only going to be a guess. You can't be 100% sure about it. Okay, so this is revision of lecture number 19. Let's move on to lecture number 20. And in lecture number 20, we learned how to describe pictures and places. So, and in this lecture, we also learned how to use comparative and superlative forms of adjectives. Now, my question is to compare the following mobiles. All right, here we have a comparison chart. We have the specifications written in this table, and we've got 4 mobiles here. Their names are Lumia 920, 8X, ATIVS, and Galaxy S4. Now, here you have the specifications. Looking at this specification, you can make statements using comparative and superlative forms of adjectives. For example, you can say that Galaxy S4 is the biggest in size because it is 5-inch. It has got 5-inch screen size, whereas 8X is the smallest, has the smallest screen size. Similarly, you can say that Galaxy S4 has larger or the largest RAM memory, whereas the other three they have 1 GB RAM. Okay. So similarly, you can look at these and you can also try to guess their prices. Probably Galaxy S4 is the most expensive, and I'm not really sure, but I think Lumia 920 is the cheapest, or the least expensive, or the cheapest. Which one do you like the most? Of course, well, I like Galaxy S4 the most, and probably you do the same. Okay, we move on to lecture number 21. And lecture number 21 was also one of the most interesting lectures that probably we had. I really enjoyed it, and I think you also enjoyed listening to various songs and also analyzing lyrics. Now, we are going to recall, and for that, what you are going to do is you are going to look at the lyrics given here, and then you are going to listen to a song which is called Billy Boy, and while you listen to it, you will fill in the blanks here. This song has got 4 stanzas in it. 3 stanzas are here on this slide, so take some time to go through these 3 slides, and then I'll display the remaining 3 slides. Okay, now I hope you have finished reading these lyrics. So here are the lyrics again, and I'm going to now play the song. This song is in American English, and I have used it many times in my language classes. And if you are an English teacher, I would suggest that you can use it in your own class, especially when I have used it for teaching, asking various kind of questions. For example, here you have where have you been, and you have other questions. Did she ask you to come in? Can she make a cherry pie? Similarly, you have, can she make a feather bed? How tall is she? How old is she? So these are various kinds of questions. Therefore, I have often used this song to teach these question forms. Okay, are you ready for the song now? Great.
Oh, where have you been, Billy boy, Billy boy? Where have you been, charming Billy? I have been to seek a wife, she's the joy of my life. She's a young thing and cannot leave her mother. Did she ask you to come in, Billy boy, Billy boy? Did she ask you to come in, charming Billy? Yes, she asked me to come in. There's a dimple on her chin. She's a young thing and cannot leave her mother.
great. So I hope that you have completed, filled in the blanks. Now I go back to the lyrics and we look at it and find your answers. So what's your answer here? She is the joy of my life. That's right. She is the joy of my life. What about here? There is a dimple on her chin. Dimple, D-I-M-P-L-E. Dimple is like a little hole that is formed in the cheek when someone smiles. It is considered beautiful. There is a dimple on her chin. Okay, how about this one? Yes, you are right. Quick, Q-U-I-C-K. Quick as you can wink an eye. आँख झपकने को कहते हैं, wink an eye. Quick as you can wink an eye. Great. Okay, number 4 here. While a standing on her head. A standing on her head. Is added to standing on her head. It is just the street language. If you just wrote standing on her head, that is okay too. But if you wrote a standing on her head, that is perfect. What about here? She is tall as any pine. That's right, P-I-N-E. You know, pine is a tall tree. She is tall as any pine and straight as a pumpkin vine. Now, Billy is actually jokingly telling her mother, describing her future wife or describing her beloved, his beloved. Okay, the last question is answered in a really very funny, amusing way. So how old is she? She is 60 times 11. That's right. She's 60 times 11, 28 and 47. Okay, so how old is she? Can you work that out? 60 times 11 would be 660. And then you add 28 and 47 to it. My God. Is he going to marry a witch? I don't know. Okay, so this was a revision of lecture number 21. Let's move on to lecture number 22. Lecture number 22 was about writing an effective paragraph. And for revision's sake, I would like you to go through this paragraph and pick out the topic sentence. So take 1 minute, go through this paragraph and underline or pick out the topic sentence in it. Okay, great. So which one do you think is the topic sentence in this paragraph? You are right, the last sentence. It is for this reason that I say sailing is tough and enjoyable sport. All the sporting details have been given earlier, and the topic sentence is the last sentence of this paragraph. Now, normally we have the topic sentence is normally placed at the beginning of a paragraph, but sometimes it is placed at the end as this one. Okay, my second question is, can you think of 3 sporting details for each of the following topic sentences? Okay. Having a first child is difficult because of the significant adjustments in your life. So can you give any 3 sporting details for this topic? Think hard. I think those of you who have their own kids can easily answer this. That's right. Well, one sporting detail could be because you have to adjust your sleeping habits. You have to sleep early, you have to get up early sometimes. Sometimes your sleep is disturbed at night, frequently disturbed at night. That's right. Similarly, you have to make yourself more responsible. Usually when you don't have kids of your own, you can take things casually. But for kids, you have to be really very careful and provide them with each and everything on time. That's right. The third thing is maybe you like clean and tidy room, but you know kids can make it really very messy. So you have to be patient, you have to bear all that. So at least these are 3 examples. 3 sporting details. You can also give examples. You can tell that how your friend who has got his first child, how his life is disturbed, how he has changed. Okay, now you can also think of 3 possible contributing factors to global warming. One is probably the emission of greenhouse gases, emission of gases by the factory and by cars. Another could be cutting down the forests. All right, so this was lecture number 22. Let's move on now to lecture number 23. And lecture 23 was also really very tasty lecture, because in this we learned how to write a recipe. And how many of you, by the way, tried that chicken Kiev? Yeah, I gave you a recipe of chicken Kiev. Maybe some of you tried it. Okay, so it was about writing a recipe. And now, can you name the following food items? Look at this picture. Can you name them? Of course, this is an apple, a banana, a broccoli, a cabbage. This one I'm not really sure. Maybe this one is a mango, this one is an orange. Yeah, I think this one is an orange. A cauliflower. These 2, they look like onions to me. This one is a cut onion, I think. This one is a tomato. And these are the bell peppers. Bell peppers come in various colors. Okay, now can you name some action words for pre and post cooking process? So before something is cooked and after something is cooked, what kind of action words are used? For pre-cooking action words, you can think of cutting, slicing, grating, pounding, or peeling, right? So what things do you peel? Yeah, normally you peel a potato, an apple, carrots, radishes. That's right, that's right. Okay, similarly, there are some other action words like soaking. You soak rice before you cook them. That means you dip them in water for a certain period of time. Similarly, you rinse vegetables, R-I-N-S-E, rinse. Rinse means washing them in water. So you wash almost all vegetables before you cook them. Okay, think about post-cooking process. Present, garnish, sprinkle, right? Or place, arrange, layer. So these are some post-cooking action words. Great. Now, what's the difference between the use of some and any? You are right. We use some with positive statements, and we use any with negative statements or questions. For example, we say, there is some sugar in the fridge, or there is some sugar in the cabinet. There isn't any sugar in the cabinet. Is there any sugar in the cabinet? Is there any sugar in the jar? There isn't any sugar in the jar. There is some sugar in the jar. So we use some with positive statements, and we use any with negative statements or with the questions. Great. Let's move on to lecture number 24. Lecture number 24 was about writing short reports. And my first question about lecture 24 is, can you name some common types of reports? So you have a book report, you have a witness report, you have a medical report, you have a lab report. There are so many different kinds of reports. And you can actually classify them into few main types, like you can have event reports, you can have, for example, news report is one kind of event report. You can have investigative reports, like an accident report or an air crash report. You can have a project report. Okay. All right, my next question is, what are the usual parts of a short report? Can you recall those four essential or the usual parts of a short report? That's right. The first part is, or first section is overview or summary. The second section is introduction or background. The third section is discussion. It can have more than 2, 3, 4 paragraphs depending on the length of your report. And the final section is conclusion or recommendation. So normally you have these 4 parts. These are the 4 usual parts of a short report. But sometimes you can add a title page before the overview or summary, and you can add attachments at the end of this report, but they are optional. Whereas these 4 are pretty much common to all short reports. Long reports can have more parts. Okay, what's the difference between overview and background section of a report? We said that first section is overview and second section of a report is called background. What's the difference between overview and background? You are right. We don't need to confuse these two. Overview is a summary. So it's the brief restatement of what we are going to explain. Whereas background is setting the context for this report. The time and place where an event took place, or what others have done about it and what new findings you have got. So background is like setting it in the right context, and overview is giving a brief summary of what you did. Okay, so there is the last question. No, that was the second last question. The last question is, how would you show poor attendance and tardiness in your students' report card? Because you remember in lecture 24 we also learned to use some common expressions when we are writing our students' report cards. So if your student shows poor attendance, or tardiness means that he usually delays in submitting assignments or comes late to the classroom. So what kind of statements can you write in his or her report card? He frequently comes late. He is casual. He does not meet deadlines. Okay, very good. So this was the revision of lecture number 24. Let's move on to lecture number 25. And in lecture 25 we talked about weather. We learned certain expressions for asking someone to describe today's weather. So can you recall the expressions that we can use when you ask someone to describe today's weather. Here are two expressions. How is the weather today? And what's the weather like today? So if you are asking about weather, you can say, how's the weather today? Or what's the weather like today? All right, now using, if I ask you this question, what's the weather like today? Can you explain? Now explain the real weather that you are experiencing right now. If you ask me, what's the weather like today? I will say, it is very hot and humid. It's sultry. Okay, how is the weather in Islamabad different from your city? For example, if you live in Multan, try to make some comparative statements. You can say, for example, that the weather in Multan is hotter than it is in Islamabad. Or you can say, it rains more often in Islamabad than it does in Multan. Or you can say, Multan is often more windy than Islamabad. Okay? Great. That was lecture number 25. Now we move on to lecture number 26. And in lecture 26, we learned how to discuss ideas in English. And in particular, we learned how to agree or disagree with someone. And along with it, I think we also learned some phrases for interrupting others. And we learned useful phrases for agreeing, politely agreeing, and politely disagreeing with someone. My first question about lecture number 26 then is, what's the difference between a fact and opinion? What's the difference between a fact and opinion? That's right. A fact is something which can be true or false, which is verifiable. So you can verify it by looking at reality. Whereas an opinion is your viewpoint, the way you think about something. And opinion, well, we don't say that opinion is true or false. Sometimes we do, but in fact, opinions are not true or false. Opinions are only different. So you might disagree with my opinion, but you can't say that my opinion is wrong and yours is right. Okay. My advice could be right or wrong. It could prove right or wrong later on. But you can't say that my opinion is wrong. So that's the difference between a fact and opinion. A fact could be true or false, and you can verify it by looking at reality, whereas an opinion is your point of view, and it could be different. Okay, now can you think of some pros and cons for the following topics? It is an important skill because without pros and cons, you can't really agree or disagree with someone. Pros means supporting ideas, and cons mean refuting ideas, and cons are giving ideas that are against. Okay, so what are your pros and cons for mobile phones? Mobile phones should be allowed in the classroom. Pros is, one supporting point could be that mobile phones should be allowed in the classroom because they can be helpful as teaching aid. One can teach or one can learn through a mobile phone. And con could be the opposing idea. So you can say mobile phones should not be allowed in the classroom because mobile phones can make students inattentive, or students may digress from the topic. Okay, children become what their parents want them to be. Do you agree with it or not? So what are the cons? Because parents train their children, so usually children, they become what their parents want them to be. And you can give examples of many players who followed in the footsteps of their parents and became important players. Or many politicians, children of many politicians become politicians because they are given proper environment and training for that. And cons could be that you can say that even the son of the Prophet Noah, he was disobedient and he didn't accept Islam or the preaching of Islam. Therefore, he was punished along with the other people. So even you see very pious people sometimes have children who are, despite all their efforts, who are disobedient or not very pious. Sometimes they even become criminals. Okay, now you can do the same for the remaining statement. I want to go forward and move on to lecture number 27. Lecture number 27 was also about agreeing and disagreeing, but this time it was giving your opinion in a written form rather than in an oral form. So you wrote an argumentative essay. My first question is, how is an argumentative essay different from other types of essays? You are right. The other types of essays are narrative essay, descriptive essay, expository essay, and of course argumentative essay. Narrative is when it narrates an event. Descriptive is when you describe a place or something, and expository is when you explain something. Argumentative is when you persuade someone. So argumentative is like persuasive essay, in which you have a clear stance, a clear standpoint, and you convince your audience or the readers to follow your opinion, to agree with your opinion, or to take certain action. Okay, my second question is, what's the usual 5-paragraph structure for an argumentative essay? Well, of course, there can be different patterns, but usually you have these 3 parts. The first part is the thesis statement, and the last part, the final part, is the conclusion. The in-between or the body paragraphs, they could be in various formats. One pattern is that you have pro-idea 1, pro-idea 2, and then you have con-idea with your refutation. Another could be that you have all 3 ideas, con ideas, and you refute them all. You can use various different patterns here. Okay, we move on to lecture number 28. Lecture number 28 was about making and giving simple presentations. And my question is, what things should we keep in mind while planning a presentation? So at a planning stage, what things should we keep in mind? That's right. We should keep in mind MAP, which means message, audience, and purpose of your presentation. We should also keep in mind the restrictions. Restrictions in terms of time, restrictions in terms of tools, and sometimes you are required to use a particular structure and format. Usually a structure and format is dictated by these 3 elements. So if you have planned these well, structure and format, you can choose a structure which is suitable for these 3. Okay, my second question is, what are the 3 steps of oral presentations? Yeah, they are very simple. Say what you are going to say. Step 1, say what you are going to say. Step 2, say it. Step 3, say what you have just said. Great. Okay, my final question about lecture 28 is, what is signposting and why is it important for presentations? That's right. Signposting is a language that guides the audience towards a particular direction. So it is a phrase or a word that guides the audience where your presentation is leading. And of course it is important because it gives clear directions to the audience. Without signposting, your audience might feel confused, baffled, or they might feel themselves in a chaos. Signposting is just as important as road signs are important for the drivers. So drivers are guided by these signposts on the road. Similarly, your presentation has signposts, verbal signposts, in order to guide your audience. Okay, we move on to lecture number 29, and lecture number 29 was about writing short book reviews. And my first question about the lecture is, can you name some types of review reports? Okay, here are some: film review, concert review, or peer review. My second question is, what's the difference between a book report and a book review? Do you recall that? Great. Okay, here is one difference. In book report, you summarize, give the main points of the book, whereas in a book review, you analyze the contents or you evaluate the contents of the book. Secondly, a book report gives your personal preference, whether you like it or not, whereas a book review gives a reasoned argument. You give supporting details in order to support your viewpoints. Okay. So finally, we move on to the last lecture, lecture 30. And in lecture 30, we learned how to describe visual organizers. My first question is, can you name some common visual organizers? That's right. The common visual organizers are bar graph, line graph, map, illustration, okay, Venn diagram, etc., etc. Now, the second question is, what are the following visual organizers good for? A tree diagram is usually used for showing hierarchy. For example, when you are giving the company's structure, you can tell who is the boss and who works under him. So when main topic is branched out into its various parts, we use a tree diagram to show that relationship. Whereas a flow chart is used in order to show a process. Line graph is used to show a trend over a period of time. Great. Now my final question is, can you describe this bar graph? And well, I'm going to show it on the next slide. Okay, here you have a bar graph, and you know that we have 4 colors. Red color is for landfill, brown color is for incineration, blue color is for recycling, and green color is for compositing. And here at the bottom you have 4 different cities: Toronto, Madrid, Kuala Lumpur, and Amman. And this bar graph is about waste disposal in 4 cities, these 4 cities. And here we have percentage of total waste. 10%, 20%, 30%. So you will look at it and you will describe it. You remember when you describe such, I think first of all you tell what in one sentence you give the summary. So you say that this bar graph illustrates waste disposal in 4 different cities, okay, in percentages. And then you can give the particular trend. For example, you can say Toronto mostly uses landfill technique, whereas Kuala Lumpur mainly use incineration. Incineration, by the way, is a process by which the waste material is burned in a furnace at a very high controlled temperature. Okay, so you can say in Madrid recycling is used something like 24%, whereas in Toronto recycling is very little, and compositing is probably the least practiced strategy for disposing of the waste material. Okay, so you can describe the trends in different using different language expressions. So with this we come to the end of today's lecture, and we look at the summary now. In lecture number 32 we learned, we recalled the course contents of lecture number 16 to lecture number 30, and we revisited and practiced the key skills, and we learned the major structures and vocabulary items. With this we come to the end of this lecture, and we also come to the end of this video series. This was the last lecture of Functional English 1. So I'm Rashid Salim saying goodbye. Hope that the whole video series have been really useful for you, and in particular these review lectures have really helped you. Thank you very much. It was really pleasure teaching you people. Thank you.